This is the real-life story of a person's disappearance during a mountain hike that almost became her last. A young woman went on a hike with a group of tourists, but in the midst of the adventure, an unforeseen tragedy occurred. She became the victim of the worst nightmare anyone could imagine. This was my first real mountain hike. I had always dreamed of such a trip, but I never thought it would turn into my personal tragedy. I set off with a group of people, most of whom I didn't know, but they all seemed like experienced hikers. We had a guide who had led people to these mountains many times before. But as it turned out later, even the best guides can't predict what nature can throw at you. That day, the weather suddenly changed. We were ascending and everything seemed fine, but suddenly a strong wind kicked up. The guide told us to quickly descend because a dangerous storm was coming. But as we started descending, I realized I had fallen behind the group. My attempt to catch up ended up with me losing my bearings and getting lost. Every step in the darkness was a real challenge. All I could hear was the wind howling and the rain pounding against the rocks. My phone had no signal, and I had no idea where I was. All my attempts to find the group were futile. I was stuck in a trap in the mountains, and as I later found out, I was in a far worse situation than I had ever imagined. Hours passed, and I realized the distance between me and the group was increasing, and I was completely alone for the night. It's hard to describe what I felt when I truly realized I was hopeless. The storm only intensified, and I was freezing, too exhausted to even fall to the ground. But the worst part was that I couldn't find shelter. On the third night, I didn't sleep at all. Trying to conserve my energy, I stayed completely still. I heard rustling in the forest and couldn't tell if it was a wild animal or if my mind was just cracking. I didn't know what to do. After 10 hours of walking and sleepless nights, I understood. I could die here, and it was no longer terrifying. It was simply my reality. Finally, after 5 days of wandering, I began to show signs of dehydration and exhaustion. My only hope was that someone would find me. Then, after a few more days, I heard shouting. My group had found me. It was like a miracle. When they found me, I was completely drained, dehydrated, and barely able to stand. I was ready to accept that it could have been my last day. But that moment brought me back to life. When I got back home, I learned that all the search operations that had started after my disappearance were difficult due to the harsh weather conditions. It became the scariest and most unforgettable event of my life. And though I survived, I never look at mountains the same way again.